This is Flashes of Insight. I'm Joe Grayland, and welcome to this conversation, which is continuing around the blessing of same-gender unions. And I'm joined this morning by Dr. James Alison, by Professor Thomas O'Loughlin, by Father Michael Kelly. Tom, I'd like to come to you now and begin with the question around liturgy and the blessing of people of the same gender in a union that approximates marriage. Where do you think the church is going in this? And do you think that our understanding of liturgy is too highbrow and needs to be much more street view?
Well, the liturgy is not something that exists outside of human beings. And liturgy is a human response to the divine. And it's also our response to one another and to human need. So it's not a question of whether you can do something or you can't do something, which suggests that can you fix the computer? Well, the answer is, if it's broken, don't ask me. I can't, because that presupposes ability, skill, power, whatever. But rather, if two people are seeking to go down their pilgrim journey as Christians, they can call on the church to intercede for them. And I think if we lose sight of that fact, that there's no such thing as a marriage or a relationship or something like this. There's a human being, another human being, could be a man and a woman, or two men or two women. We treat the reality of that brother, those brothers, that sister, those sisters, and their need. And then we, as pastors, try to respond to that need by helping them to discover the way forward. And one of the ways we help people is we intercede for them, and we help them to intercede for one another. And that's what blessing is. Blessing isn't some sort of magical formula that turns X into Y.
Okay.
It's a situation and a response to a situation.
Yes. James, coming then to you, do you think that the gay and lesbian, trans, the queer congregation within the church actually still needs or seeks the church's blessing on their unions or on blessing of them for anything?
Well, I think a number of people do. I mean, I've been privileged to participate as a witness, and in some sense, the ecclesiastical witness, to several such, which is people looking to do exactly that. They're seeking, to celebrate a fixed stage in their lives. They're seeking to bear witness to something. And their friends and family are seeking to give thanks to God for the blessing that these people are to them. It's taking on Tom's point, it's a circular quality. We bless God who blesses us. That's how it works. We enter into the blessing. And I think that there's an element that people say, yeah, this is important. Us being together, us sharing our lives.
Sorry, Mick.
I just wanted to raise something. Look, my understanding of Catholic marriage is that the sacrament is actually something that is administered by the people in the marriage. It's not anything that comes from the blessing of the of the celebrant. The celebrant stands there as a witness to it, and provides a formula for it, and all that. But at the end of the day, it's the couple that give the sacrament to each other. Now, I think Catholic marriage has a real problem when it comes to saying, you know, rules and law prevail over and against sacrament. I just think that that's something that needs a lot more exploration before I'm prepared to concede that it is the case.
James, would you like to come back to that?
No, I mean, I entirely agree. I think that it's the couple who are performing the act, whether it's the sacrament or the blessing, it's they who are doing it. And the key to that, I think, and this is the key thing for all Catholics, is that it's, and this is true of straight, of opposite-sex couples as of same-sex couples, what makes marriage sacramental is the fact that they're baptized. If two baptized people, therefore two people whose life are to be understood as part of a self-giving in imitation of Christ, if this is part of the sign of how they're living out that self-giving which is coming from baptism, then it seems to me that any form of ecclesiastical witness or authority can be is a witness to it, to say, yes,
good.
We are watching this, we are receiving this, we are delighted with this. Thank God for this.
So I'll bring in Tom.
There's another danger in this idea that somehow or other, when the Vatican came out with this responsum to this so-called question, it had this idea that this was somehow, it uses a dreadful phrase, the church cannot bless sin.
Oh yes.
Which is bizarre, because it sees that this is somehow or other as if the church is going around with a rubber stamp saying, you're okay, you're not okay. This is right, this is wrong, this is perfect, this is imperfect. Now, you can think about abstract situations and say a situation in an ideal world, things are right or wrong. But once you actually start dealing with actual baptized sisters and brothers, if you start going and thinking, you're okay, you're not okay, you end up in a bizarre situation of, well, who is okay?
Yeah.
There's that ancient Christian story that has found itself lodged in John's Gospel. It's also lodged in some manuscripts in Luke's Gospel. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. So we can't start going around thinking that blessing is some sort of marking people's paper. Oh, yes, you've got the tick, you're okay. All human beings are in need of divine mercy, and we're all only able to see a little step ahead. It's that line of Newman, lead thou me on, because I can't see the distant scene. But we're all just moving one step ahead. And that's where, whether we call it blessings or sacraments or whatever, it's always in the messiness of life that liturgy exists, not with these perfect people.
So Mick, thank you. What do you think? Do you think life is that messy?
Well, of course it is. But furthermore, the question is, who is making these assertions and who is making these determinations? And, these people are self-important, self-promoting empty heads, and they don't really know what they don't know. Now, I've knocked around enough in, divorced and remarried families, and, my own parents were divorced when I was a teenager. What on earth is this rubbish about God being in or out of a relationship determined by some bloke wearing a dress? Please give me a break. It's just fanciful beyond belief. Sit down, get involved in the reality of the experience, the reality of the interaction, the reality of relationships, and sort things out from there. Full stop. That's enough.
Yeah. The baptism thing interests me as well, because there's an unexplored question that if you baptize somebody who later discovers themselves to be a disordered nature, did the baptism take in the first instance? Because if the nature is discovered to be disordered, at some stage it must have been created disordered. Did any of you want to pick up on that sort of idea or question?
Well, when I find any human being that is a perfectly ordered nature, then I will comment.
Okay. James.
Well, no, I agree, but in a sense, we're dancing around the sheer ridiculousness. The ridiculousness of all this, it's nothing to do with blessing. They're not concerned about blessing. They're trying to maintain their aprioristic anthropology, because without it, a whole lot of things fall apart. And for their aprioristic anthropology to work, there is a good. That good is marital intercourse between people of the opposite sex that is open to procreation. Everything that is not that is in some sense a defect from it and a bad thing. Something that could not even achieve that by its nature, because it's between two people of the same sex, is objectively disordered as regards its object. And therefore the person who has the tendency to act like that has a objectively disordered tendency. Literally, that's what they're defending. They're defending the capacity to define somebody from an aprioristic deduction based on a good, but it's a good run amok. The good is a good. The problem is when you start to make it the only good and start actually trying to deduce who people are negatively from that good. That is the farce that's at the heart of this. What they can't do, because they don't have any, they would literally, and I think this is something worth remembering, the moment you remove that, they have literally nothing to say about gay and lesbian people. There's nothing about gay and lesbian people in divine revelation. There's nothing about gay and lesbian people in scripture. The only teaching they have about gay and lesbian people at the moment is an aprioristic negative deduction. The moment you drop that, they have literally nothing to say. And of course, that's frightening, because that means it's going to have to be gay and lesbian people who are going to have to work out what actually our flourishing does look like, what our forms of blessing and liturgy are going to take. If you like that.
Where do you think this is all going? Are we on the verge of collapse? Yeah, you mentioned earlier on, James, that you read the German bishop's response and also the critique of many bishops and theologians around the world. You read that probably as an indication of things that have to change. So can you give me an idea of what you think that might look like?
What the change might look like? Well, I think that's beginning to happen, to the extent that, if you like, the really encouraging thing was people not being frightened of saying, we're just going to carry on. We're going to work out what this looks like. This is sideways. We learn sideways. It's from what we see and learn from other people doing relationally that we discover who we are, and then we discover how to respond to things. The relational is before the rational. That's something which Francis understands very well. And I think that that's where we're going. There was an attempt to try and impose the rational against the relational. That failed. So I think that remembering that the relational is prior to the rational is the way forward.
And it's also worth recalling that the dialogical, what we discover in relation to one another, has a far greater importance for us as human beings and for our apprehension of the truth than the dialectical, which is trying to imagine something and then make deductions. And one of the weaknesses of Christian theology has been a lack of awareness of this difference between dialectical theology, which has held sway since the medieval universities, and dialogical theology, which is actually let me understand your experience and you engage with my experience so that together as members of the church, we are discovering what is the hope that we are called to. And I think that's amazing. So, you say, are we on the brink of collapse? I think actually we're beginning to grow up in many ways, because learning dialogically and learning from experience is far harder than just saying, what's the answer, sir? What's the answer?
Yeah. So Mick, in terms of this learning dialogically, how would you categorize the dialogue within Asia or Australasia, within Australia, in terms of these issues that we're talking about?
Australasia, I don't think they know how to do it, so it's not happening. And also, people have been belted over the head so vigorously for the last 25 years that they've given up trying. Asia is different and much more complex, because what you're dealing with is a couple of key things. First of all, you've got hieratic societies. You've got clearly spelt out divisions and separations between people on a broad social scale. And that's also true in the church, that people have status and, dare not step outside that status and try to behave themselves to live within that status and all that, so that they don't have much to say. And then there are, and have always been in the church in Asia, people who don't fit and people who are, will just say aberrant things to try and give it a go. But there's not the clarity that you might find in Europe or North America about these differences and distinctions and ways of interaction. I just don't think that's possible. I mean, if you look around Asia, you look at people trapped in cultures that in many respects are ossified, and intellectual cultures that are ossified too.
Right. James, you've spent a lot of time living in South America. You're British and now you're living in Spain. What do you see in the difference of culture around those places where you inhabit, in terms of the whole question around inclusion of gay and lesbians?
Well, one of the things which I noticed really, since the 1990s is quite how fast, particularly in the Catholic countries, the movement spread. The moment it became obvious to people that gay people are just a thing that are, rather than some terrible defect, the speed with which societies in general said, oh, that's fine, let's take this on board. With the result that, dear Lord, Argentina getting gay marriage before the United States? Really, countries which, particularly, Anglo-Saxons, we tend to be rather arrogant about the Spanish-American countries and think of them backwards. And of course, there is a lot of violence and corruption, all that. But actually, if I think of Mexico, I think of Colombia, I think of countries that have an enormously rich gay and lesbian life that is very flourishing, and with a very great deal of socially well worked out things. Obviously, the church not being particularly part of that, except in as far as it can't help by being because of reality. So I think that these things are actually moving forward rather faster than one might think in those countries. I make a distinction, incidentally, between those countries where the evangelical and Pentecostal inroads from the United States, starting from the 1960s, have hit strongest, and where there is a strong evangelical parliamentary group, as in, for instance, Peru and Brazil, where you find much, much stronger resistance to any inclusivity of a gay and lesbian sort, where promoted by Protestants. Right. And of course, then you get right-wing Catholics who go along with it as well for the usual reasons. But it really is quite interesting that, as is traditional, Catholics in general, lay Catholics, are not particularly worked up about this issue. It's a much, much stronger black and white issue in Protestant cultures than it is in Catholic cultures. Look at the United States with that. And so I've been impressed by how quickly movement has gone on. And one of the ways, as it were, that people work out how it goes on is once the bishops start making a big fuss about it, everyone realizes that the game's over.
Yeah.
In a sense, they're the beacon that it's nearly at an end.
Yeah. Tom, coming now to you, Ireland, your home country, is one of the few countries in the world that's actually brought in marriage equality through a plebiscite. And England is the country where you live. So do you have any comments around what you see happening there?
Well, I would just echo what James was saying. I remember at the time of the referendum in Ireland, I can't remember how many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I remember chatting to several old clergy who said, "Oh, it'll never happen, it'll never happen." And they couldn't accept that gay marriage would just come in. But I knew, just talking to my friends, that it would come in with a massive majority, which it did. Because once people start to treat gay people as just other human beings, then suddenly the problem goes away. If you stop othering and demonizing, human beings are remarkably welcoming of other human beings with their situation, which is different to my situation. And that's a wonderful thing that we should be celebrating as Christians, rather than often trying to engage in othering. But I think actually James brought up a very interesting point. The biggest support for the Vatican statement has come from some evangelical groups who are suddenly saying Vatican is upholding the teaching of the Bible. And of course, this is nonsense. Number one, the Vatican statement was based on a very particular reading of natural law. And the idea that one appeals to the Bible to get simple yes-no answers, anyone who begins a statement, the Bible teaches, is just talking through their hat, because the Bible is not some sort of user manual for being a Christian in the way that fundamentalists put forward. So it also raises this big question of Christianity must never be identified either with the silliness of the sort of statement that came from the Vatican, or with the silliness that is Christian fundamentalism.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to leave this segment here. You've been listening to Flashes of Insight.